Picture this. You're holding in your hands the weapon that split the sky, triggered earthquakes, or decided the fate of an entire kingdom. Not just tools of war, artifacts so loaded with meaning that entire civilizations built themselves around their legend. The kind of objects that make Indiana Jones look like he's hunting for lost keychains. In this video, we're diving into 12 of the most legendary weapons ever conceived by the human imagination. 12 weapons that each, in their own way, completely redefined what the word power could mean. We're talking gods, heroes, warriors with serious anger management issues, and blacksmiths who clearly had way too much time on their hands. We've also got a lance that may have changed the entire course of Christian history, and a sword so venerated that people are still arguing today about where exactly it ended up. Stay until the end, because some of these stories are absolutely wild, and I've saved the most fascinating one for last. I promise you'll walk away with enough dinner party material to completely dominate any conversation for the next 6 months. Let's start at the very top. Zeus himself, king of Olympus, father of the gods, and undisputed master of the sky. His weapon is the Keraunos, what we commonly call the Thunderbolt of Zeus. And if you looked up ultimate weapon in a mythological dictionary, you'd probably find his headshot next to the definition. Because honestly, when you can reduce an entire city to ash in a fraction of a second, you don't really need anything else to make an impression at a dinner party. The Keraunos wasn't forged in any ordinary workshop. It was crafted by the Cyclopes, those massive, one-eyed giants who lived deep beneath the earth and were, according to Greek mythology, the finest blacksmiths in the entire universe. Zeus freed them from Tartarus, the grim underworld prison where they'd been locked up by their own father, Kronos, and in gratitude, they gifted him a weapon of absolute power. As thank you gifts go, this one puts a fruit basket to shame. Here's what most people don't know. The Keraunos isn't just one single weapon. It's composed of 3 distinct thunderbolts, each with its own specific function, and that's where things get genuinely interesting. The first is a warning bolt, a kind of divine heads-up that Zeus sends to signal to enemies or subjects that his patience is wearing thin. Think of it as a very strongly worded letter, but written in lightning. The second bolt is punitive, the one Zeus actually fires when the warning hasn't landed. This is the moment the sky tears open and something, or someone, gets thoroughly incinerated. Typhon, the most terrifying monster in all of Greek mythology, famously received this express treatment. The third bolt, the most devastating of all, is the one Zeus is said to be saving for the end of time. It has never been used, at least not in any myth that's come down to us, and given its description, that's probably for the best. What makes the Keraunos genuinely fascinating beyond its raw, destructive power is its symbolic dimension. Zeus isn't simply the strongest god, he's the guarantor of cosmic order, the sovereign of divine justice. The thunderbolt he carries isn't just a weapon, it's the physical expression of his authority, the instrument through which he maintains the balance between mortals and immortals. When Zeus raises the Keraunos, it's not a random act of divine rage, it's a statement of principle. In ancient Greek culture, lightning wasn't merely seen as a terrifying natural phenomenon. It was Zeus's signature on human affairs, proof that the king of the gods was paying attention. The Greeks interpreted lightning strikes as divine messages, oracles, even judgments. For them, a bolt of lightning hitting your house carried roughly the same weight as receiving a royal decree. The cultural legacy of the Keraunos is almost impossible to overstate. It inspired the imperial eagle of Rome, which symbolically carried the thunderbolt in its talons. It was stamped on Greek and Roman coins, carved into temple walls, painted onto the shields of armies who wanted to channel divine power. And if you've ever played God of War, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, or even sat through the Percy Jackson films, you've encountered this weapon dozens of times without perhaps fully registering the weight of what you were looking at. The Keraunos is, in every meaningful sense, the grandfather of every magical weapon in modern fiction. If Zeus rules the skies, Poseidon governs everything that's wet, deep, and fundamentally unpredictable. The seas, the oceans, the rivers, but also earthquakes, which is a fairly terrifying combo when you think about it. And his weapon? The Trident. That 3-pronged spear that has become, over the centuries, one of the most recognizable symbols in all of world mythology. It's essentially the divine logo that never needed a rebrand. Poseidon's trident, like Zeus's thunderbolt, was forged by the Cyclopes. There's a lovely consistency to Greek myth on this point. point. When you need a divine weapon, you call the Cyclopes. End of discussion. But this particular trident isn't merely a combat weapon. It's an instrument for physically reshaping the world itself. With it, Poseidon can slam the ground and trigger earthquakes, churn the waters into storms capable of swallowing entire fleets, or alternatively, calm even the most violent seas. He can make freshwater springs burst from solid rock, and according to some versions of the myths, he can make horses emerge from ocean foam, because Poseidon is also the god of horses, which is, admittedly, a niche side hustle for a sea deity. The most famous episode involving the trident is the legendary contest between Poseidon and Athena for the patronage of a great city that would become the capital of Greece. Poseidon drove his trident into the Acropolis and produced a spring. Impressive, right? Except the water was salt water, and therefore completely useless for drinking, cooking, or anything practical. Athena, for her part, planted her spear and produced an olive tree, loaded with fruit, timber, and oil. The citizens chose Athena's gift. The city took her name, Athens. Poseidon took the loss very badly, which is entirely understandable. Losing a generosity contest because you misjudged your own water quality is the kind of thing that would bother anyone. His response was to flood the region and send storms for a considerable period, the ancient equivalent of passive-aggressively unfollowing someone, but scaled up to a natural disaster. The trident's reach across culture and history is remarkable. Roman gladiators called retiarii carried a version of it in the arena. Fishermen across dozens of cultures saw in this three-pronged tool a direct connection to marine forces. It appears on flags, coats of arms, and sports logos worldwide, including that of Maserati, which is perhaps the most expensive tribute to Poseidon ever designed. In pop culture, this trident became Aquaman's signature weapon in DC Comics, King Triton's royal accessory in The Little Mermaid, and appears in countless video games and fantasy franchises. The power of a symbol representing control over the oceans, in a world where the sea meant the absolute unknown, was something the ancient Greeks understood instinctively and encoded permanently. We're moving into the Norse pantheon now, and we're starting with arguably the most recognizable weapon in all of Germanic Scandinavian mythology, Mjolnir, the hammer of Thor. If you've never heard of this one, I genuinely don't know what to tell you. Between the Marvel films, the video games, the TV series, the tattoos, and the pendants sold in every Viking-themed gift shop in the world, Mjolnir is everywhere. But knowing the actual story, the real mythological history behind this object, is a completely different thing, and it's a story worth telling in full. The name Mjolnir in Old Norse means roughly crusher or grinder. It's direct, it's honest. It doesn't leave much room for interpretation regarding what it does to your enemies. Mjolnir was crafted by two dwarves, Brokkr and Sindri, who were competing against the sons of Ivaldi, another legendary team of dwarf smiths, to create the most perfect magical objects in all the 9 worlds. And all of this started because of Loki. Because in Norse mythology, it is always because of Loki. In a characteristically mischievous move, Loki had cut off the golden hair of Sif, Thor's wife, while she slept. Thor was furious and threatened Loki with consequences of a fairly graphic nature if he didn't find a way to fix the situation. Loki, understandably not keen on being flattened, went to find the finest dwarf smiths he could. The sons of Ivaldi created new golden hair for Sif, then Gungnir, Odin's spear, and finally Skidbladnir, a magical ship that could fold up small enough to fit in a pocket. Brokkr and Sindri, determined to prove their superiority, began forging their own creations. Loki, in his infinite wisdom, transformed himself into a fly and came to sting Brokkr while he worked the bellows feeding the forge fires. During the forging of the hammer, Brokkr was stung on the eyelid and flinched, just slightly. That's why Mjolnir's handle is a little too short compared to what it was meant to be, a tiny defect that nearly cost them the victory. Despite the shortened handle, the gods judged Mjolnir to be far and away the greatest of all the creations, because no other weapon was anywhere near as effective at destroying frost giants. Thor got his hammer. The frost giants developed a serious structural problem. Mjolnir's powers go well beyond simple destruction. It always returns to Thor's hand after being thrown, regardless of distance. It can reduce mountains to rubble. It controls thunder and lightning. It can resurrect dead animals. Thor famously used it to bring his goats back to life after eating them, which is a very very specific culinary practice that raises questions. And above all, it can only be wielded by someone who is worthy, a concept central to Norse mythology and one that Marvel exploited to great effect, even if the cinematic version took certain liberties with the source material. In Viking culture, Mjolnir was a deeply significant religious symbol. Thousands of hammer-shaped pendants have been found at archaeological sites across Scandinavia, worn as protective amulets by people who genuinely believed in its power. It was the Norse equivalent of a Christian cross. It was invoked at births, marriages, and funerals. Thor was the god of farmers, fishermen, and ordinary working people who needed protection, and Mjolnir was his emblem. That's why this weapon has survived for over 1,000 years in collective memory. It meant something real to real people. Still in Norse territory, but we're moving up the divine hierarchy. If Mjolnir belongs to Thor, Gungnir belongs to Odin, the All-Father, king of the Aesir gods, deity of wisdom, war, poetry, and death. When the ruler of Asgard chooses a weapon, you can assume he's not picking up a random stick from the forest floor. Gungnir means the swaying one, or one that vibrates in flight in Old Norse, a rather poetic name for a divine war spear. Like Mjolnir, it was crafted by the sons of Ivaldi, those supremely talented dwarf smiths who seemed to have a monopoly on weapons that transcended the laws of physics. What defines Gungnir above all else is its absolute, perfect accuracy. Once thrown, it always hits its target. Always. No matter the distance, no matter the obstacles in the way, no matter whether the target is moving or hiding behind a shield, Gungnir finds what it's been thrown at with a certainty that physics cannot explain, but mythology justifies completely. It's essentially the conceptual ancestor of precision-guided missiles, but with significantly more runes carved on it and considerably less paperwork involved. Those runes inscribed on Gungnir's shaft are actually a fundamental part of its nature. In Norse tradition, runes aren't simply an alphabet, they're primal forces, keys that unlock the deep mechanisms of the cosmos. Odin himself acquired knowledge of the runes at extraordinary personal cost. He hung himself from Yggdrasil, the world tree, for 9 days and 9 nights, wounding himself with Gungnir, refusing all food and water in order to pierce the mystery of these symbols. This ritual sacrifice is one of the most complex and philosophically rich narratives in all of Norse mythology. The fact that the spear itself is simultaneously the instrument of sacrifice and the object inscribed with the runes gives it a spiritual dimension that few other mythological weapons can match. Gungnir plays a defining role in the great events of Norse cosmology. It's the weapon Odin hurls over the enemy army at the outbreak of the first war between the Aesir and the Vanir, the two families of Norse gods, symbolically consecrating the battlefield. This gesture became a real Viking warrior tradition, throwing a spear over the enemy ranks while invoking Odin's name before battle. It was an act of dedication, an offering of the coming dead to the All-Father. And then there is Ragnarok, the great Norse apocalypse, the final battle at the end of time. The prophecies foretell that Odin himself will fall there, swallowed by the wolf Fenrir. Before he falls, he will be seen raising Gungnir one last time, his perfect spear unable to change the inevitable fate of the gods. That's perhaps what makes Gungnir so quietly devastating as a symbol. Even the most perfect weapon, even the spear of an all-knowing god, cannot stop what must happen. Odin knows this. He rides into battle anyway. That's the most Norse definition of courage you'll ever encounter. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the world's most legendary weapons, right now is the perfect time to hit subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss our next journey through the myths and legends that shaped human history. Takes 2 seconds, means the world. We're leaving the Norse world now and heading to Ireland, specifically into the Ulster cycle, one of the richest bodies of mythological literature in all of Europe. It's an absolute goldmine for anyone who loves epic stories, tragic heroes, and weapons whose names are genuinely challenging to pronounce if you've never encountered Old Irish. Bolg, or Bolg in its original Irish spelling, is the spear of Cúchulainn, the greatest hero of Irish mythology. Think of him as the Irish Achilles, extraordinary strength and speed from childhood, capable of battlefield feats that defy rational explanation, and fated for a tragic end despite despite his superhuman gifts. His birth name was Setanta. He became Cúchulainn, meaning the Hound of Cullen, after killing the guard dog of a blacksmith named Cullen and promising to serve as the man's watchdog until a replacement could be trained. An oddly literal origin story for one of mythology's greatest heroes. But back to the spear. The Guy Bolg is an exceptional weapon, forged according to the myths from the bones of a sea monster called the Cúchulainn, killed during a battle between two colossal creatures. Its design is terrifyingly specific. A single point upon entry, but once it penetrates a body, it splits into 30 barbed points that fan outward inside the wound, making any removal completely impossible. Once the Guy Bolg has struck you, there is no recovery. The injury is fatal, guaranteed, every single time. It's a weapon designed not merely to wound, but to kill, and to kill in the most absolute and irreversible way conceivable. The throwing technique is equally extraordinary. Cúchulainn had to launch it using his foot rather than his hand. Not the most conventional throwing method you'll encounter in a weapons manual, but one that apparently gave it a unique trajectory and unstoppable force. This detail means the spear was deployed in very specific circumstances, and using it was in itself a signal that its wielder had decided to end the fight permanently. The most devastating moment involving the Guy Bolg is the duel between Cúchulainn and his closest friend Ferdiad, whom he had trained alongside under the legendary warrior woman Scathach, the same teacher who had gifted Cúchulainn the spear in the first place. Pushed against each other by the political machinery of the conflict between Ulster and Connacht, the two friends fought for 3 full days. On the morning of the 4th, Cúchulainn used the Guy Bolg, knowing full well what it meant. Ferdiad died. Cúchulainn wept over his friend's body while knowing he'd had no real choice. It's one of the most heartbreaking scenes in all of Celtic literature, and it illustrates the great curse that accompanies the mightiest weapons. They never, ever distinguish between an enemy and a friend. We've arrived at the weapon that has arguably generated more books, films, debates, and fan theories than any other on this list. A weapon that became, in the Western imagination, the absolute symbol of rightful kingship, chivalry, and medieval mystery. Excalibur. Just that single word is enough to trigger a cascade of images, movies, tabletop RPGs, and heated arguments in university medieval studies departments. But the actual story, the literary and mythological history of Excalibur, is considerably more layered than most people realize. First, let's establish something important. Excalibur and the sword in the stone are not necessarily the same weapon. I know. This is the kind of information that destabilizes years of deeply held cultural assumptions. In the oldest and most detailed versions of the Arthurian legend, particularly in Chrétien de Troyes and in Thomas Mallory's Le Morte d'Arthur, they are two separate swords. The sword in the stone is the one young Arthur pulls out to prove his legitimate claim to the throne. Excalibur, on the other hand, is presented to him by the Lady of the Lake, that mysterious figure who rises from the water to hand him a sword on an arm clothed in shimmering white silk, which is probably the most dramatic gift presentation in the history of human storytelling. Excalibur's properties are extraordinary. The blade itself is unbreakable and absolutely razor sharp, but it's the scabbard that is often described as the true source of its power. As long as Arthur wears it, he cannot bleed enough to die in battle. The scabbard is therefore more precious than the sword itself, a nuance that Morgan Le Fay, Arthur's half-sister, grasps perfectly when she steals it to engineer his downfall. This distinction between the offensive weapon and its protective cover is a narrative subtlety that most modern adaptations gloss over, but it reveals something profound about the philosophy underlying the legend. True strength isn't found in destruction, but in the capacity to endure. The end of Excalibur is as fascinating as its origin. Dying after the Battle of Camlan, where he has been betrayed by his own son, Mordred, Arthur commands his knight Bedivere to throw the sword into the lake. Bedivere hesitates twice, transfixed by the sword's beauty, before finally obeying. When Excalibur hits the water, an arm rises from the depths, catches it, brandishes it 3 times, then disappears beneath the surface. The lake reclaims the sword, as if a loan has simply expired. This return to the origin, to the water, to the Lady of the Lake, closes the cycle with a narrative elegance that is quietly breathtaking. Excalibur was never truly Arthur's, it was entrusted to him. On a more grounded historical note, a sword long claimed to be Excalibur is embedded in a rock at the sanctuary of Rocamadour in southern France. A real medieval blade, real rock, and a story that local tradition has kept alive for centuries. Historians remain appropriately skeptical about the attribution, but the sword is genuinely there, and people genuinely travel to see it. Legends have a way of making themselves physical. Staying within the Arthurian cycle, let's talk about a weapon far less celebrated than Excalibur, but whose importance to the great Arthurian tragedy is absolutely central: Clarent. If Excalibur is Arthur's battle sword, Clarent is his ceremonial sword, the sword of peace, the one he used not to fight, but to knight his companions and mark occasions of great importance. Think of it as the Excalibur he kept for formal events, equally magnificent, equally loaded with symbolic weight, but designed to express royal authority in its civil rather than military dimension. Clarent is often described in medieval texts as less sharp than Excalibur, not because it's inferior in quality, but because a ceremonial sword isn't meant to cut anything more substantial than the air during a knighting ceremony. It's decorated, precious, and considered a symbol of the kingdom's stability and continuity. What makes Clarent grimly famous within the Arthurian cycle is the manner in which it is stolen and used. Mordred, Arthur's illegitimate son, born of his tragic union with his half-sister Morgase, steals Clarent from the king's own castle and claims it for himself. During the final Battle of Camlan, that catastrophic clash where the Arthurian world tears itself apart, it is Clarent, the sword of peace, that Mordred uses to deliver the mortal wound to his father. The narrative irony is almost unbearably cruel. Arthur is not killed by a foreign enemy's weapon. He's killed by his own ceremonial sword of peace, wielded by his own son. The symbol of stability and reconciliation becomes the instrument of final destruction. It's one of the most vertiginous falls in all of medieval literature, and it says something painfully accurate about how kingdoms and institutions and families tend to destroy themselves from within. Clarent represents a dimension of legendary weapons that often goes unexamined. Sometimes it isn't the most fearsome blade that does the most damage. It's the one you thought you didn't need to worry about. Back to ancient Greece, for a weapon that doesn't always receive the attention it deserves, despite enabling one of the most spectacular victories in all of Greek mythology. The harp is the blade with which Perseus decapitated Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned anyone who looked at her directly into stone. And trust me, you need a fairly exceptional weapon to pull that off. The harp is a curved sword, sometimes described as a sickle or a scimitar, of impressive length and absolute sharpness. Its curved design isn't decorative, it's functional. This is a weapon built to slice in a sweeping arc, not to thrust or block, which makes it ideal for a situation requiring a clean, single stroke delivered at speed without looking directly at your target. Its divine origin varies slightly depending on the source. In some versions, the harp belongs to Hermes, the messenger god, who lends it to Perseus to help him on his quest. In others, it was forged by Hephaestus himself, the divine blacksmith of Olympus, who crafted it specifically for the mission. Either way, the weapon is clearly of divine manufacture, which explains why it's capable of severing something as extraordinarily resilient as the neck of an immortal Gorgon. Perseus couldn't look at Medusa directly without risking the same fate as every other unfortunate who'd approached her. So he used Athena's polished bronze shield as a mirror, guiding his movements by watching the reflection. With the harp, he severed Medusa's head in a single stroke. What emerged from that severed neck is one of the strangest details in all of Greek mythology. Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a golden-sworded giant, both sprang fully formed from Medusa's blood, conceived by Poseidon before her death. The harp thus indirectly brought Pegasus into existence, which gives it a double claim to mythological glory. The sword appears again in Perseus's subsequent exploits, when he confronts the sea monster Cetus to rescue Andromeda, chained to a cliff and offered as a sacrifice. The harp is consistently the weapon of liberation. It severs the monsters that imprison the innocent and makes possible what no one else dared attempt. This is the most ambiguous weapon on our list, the one that blurs the categories and forces us to reconsider what the word weapon actually means. The Aegis is officially a shield, or in some sources, a divine breastplate, but its offensive capabilities make it a weapon in the fullest sense. We're including it here because an object capable of triggering mass panic in entire armies and psychologically paralyzing enemies on a battlefield absolutely earns its place. The Aegis begins as an attribute of Zeus. In its oldest form, it's a shield covered with the skin of Amalthea, the divine goat who nursed Zeus during his infancy in Crete, where he'd been hidden from his father Keraunos, who had the unsettling habit of eating his own children. Zeus's Aegis allows him to trigger thunder and lightning when he shakes it. It functions simultaneously as protection and meteorological weapon, a combination that no military equipment has managed to replicate to this day, despite considerable effort. But the most famous Aegis, the one that appears most frequently in war narratives, is that of Athena. The goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare adapted it for her own use, adding to its center the head of Medusa, the very Gorgon that Perseus had decapitated, with his harp-assisted assist from Athena herself. With Medusa's face mounted on the Aegis, anyone who looks at it is struck with absolute terror. Not courage-testing fear, absolute, irrational, will-dissolving panic that makes the idea of continuing to fight simply evaporate. It's a psychological weapon of devastating effectiveness. It doesn't kill, it breaks people from the inside before the real battle even begins. In Homer's Iliad, Athena deploys the Aegis to terrorize the Trojan ranks and cause a general rout. Zeus himself uses it to throw enemy armies into confusion. This isn't a dueling weapon, it's a weapon of mass psychological disruption at mythological scale. The linguistic legacy of the Aegis might be its most quietly remarkable contribution to the modern world. The expression "under the aegis of," which we still use daily to mean under the protection or authority of, comes directly from this mythological object. Every time you read in a newspaper that a conference was held under the aegis of some organization, you are, without realizing it, referencing Athena's shield. Not bad for an object that's been around for 3,000 years. Back to Ireland, for a weapon that deserves to be far better known than it currently is. Fragarach, whose name translates from Old Irish as the Answerer or the Retaliator. That slightly enigmatic name conceals a sword of absolutely extraordinary properties, one that makes it among the most formidable blades in all of Celtic mythology. Fragarach first belongs to Manannán mac Lir, the Irish god of the sea, guardian of the Isle of Man and sovereign of Tír na nÓg, the land of the young in Celtic afterlife tradition. He passes it to Lugh Lámhada, the god of light and of all skilled crafts, and it becomes one of the 4 treasures of the Tuatha De Danann, those divine beings who ruled Ireland before the coming of the Gaels. The other 3 treasures are the Dagda's Cauldron, the Spear of Lugh, and the Stone of Fall. These are cosmic objects, artifacts that define and sustain the order of the Irish mythological world. Fragarach's powers are precisely described in the medieval Irish manuscripts. No armor can resist its blade, no shield can deflect its strikes, and it cuts through any protection as if it simply doesn't exist. But its most fascinating power is different in nature entirely. When placed at a person's throat, Fragarach compels them to speak the truth. It is impossible to lie when the sword's edge touches your neck. This makes it simultaneously a weapon of war and a divine lie detector of absolute reliability. This quality is genuinely unique in world mythology. No other legendary sword that I'm aware of combines martial supremacy with the power of truth compulsion. In a world where oaths and pledges carried absolute sacred weight, where breaking your word was among the gravest possible offenses, a weapon capable of forcing truth was of incalculable power. Fragarach isn't just a tool for defeating physical enemies, it's a tool for defeating dishonesty itself. A king who possesses Fragarach cannot be deceived, manipulated, or misled. In the volatile political landscape of Irish mythology, that kind of certainty is worth more than any army. We're leaving the strictly mythological realm now and entering medieval French legend, that fascinating territory where verified history and epic fiction blend with complete nonchalance and produce something that is often more powerful than either alone. Durandal is the sword of Roland, nephew of Charlemagne and one of the 12 peers of France, that elite circle of knights who formed the inner council of the great Carolingian king. Roland actually existed. He was a military commander of Charlemagne who died in 778 during the withdrawal of the Frankish army through the Pyrenees, killed in an ambush at Roncevaux Pass. But the historical Roland, however courageous, bears little resemblance to the Roland of the Chanson de Roland, that cornerstone cornerstone of French medieval literature, written 2 centuries after the events, which transforms him into a near-superhuman warrior wielding a magical, indestructible blade. Durandal was reportedly forged by a legendary smith named Munificon, who spent 3 years on its creation, also crafting Curtana and Joyeuse, other celebrated swords of the Carolingian cycle, during that same extraordinary period of output. 3 years for a single sword seems excessive until you see the specifications. Durandal is described as absolutely indestructible. Its edge is the sharpest that has ever existed. But what makes it truly extraordinary lies inside its hilt. The pommel is said to contain sacred relics of staggering religious significance: a tooth of Saint Peter, blood of Saint Basil, hair of Saint Denis, and a piece of the Virgin Mary's garment. This combination of battlefield weapon and Christian reliquary is deeply revealing of medieval mentality, where the spiritual and the martial didn't oppose each other, but mutually reinforced. A sword protected by saints is a blessed sword, and therefore a potentially invincible one. The most famous scene involving Durandal is Roland's death at Roncevaux. Surrounded by enemies, mortally wounded, Roland refuses to allow his sword to fall into enemy hands. He tries to destroy it by striking it against a rock to prevent it from ever serving his enemies. Durandal resists every attempt because it is indestructible by definition. So Roland hurls it with his remaining strength into a ravine. Some versions say into a river, so it will never be found. This desperate final act, this determination to protect the sword even in death, is one of the most emotionally striking images in all medieval literature. It says everything about how medieval warriors related to their weapons, not as tools, but as extensions of their honor. Here's the part that genuinely unsettles the rational mind. There is a real sword called Durandal embedded in the rock face at the sanctuary of Rocamadour in the Lot region of southern France. It has been there since the Middle Ages. Nobody knows with certainty how it got there or precisely when it arrived. Local tradition attributes it to Roland himself. Historians remain cautiously non-committal, but the sword is genuinely there. Real metal, real rock, and people still travel specifically to see it. That's what a great legend does. It insists on becoming real. We've reached the final weapon on this list, and I promised you it was worth the wait. I'll let you be the judge. The Lance of Longinus, also known as the Holy Lance, the Holy Spear, or the Spear of Destiny, is not a mythological weapon in the sense that the others are. It doesn't belong to a god. It wasn't forged by dwarves or cyclopes. It doesn't have powers attested in ancient heroic texts. And yet, it may be the most symbolically loaded weapon on this entire list. Because according to Christian tradition, it is the weapon that pierced the side of Jesus of Nazareth during the crucifixion in Jerusalem around 33 AD. Longinus is the name given by later Christian tradition to the Roman soldier who performed this act, possibly to ensure death, possibly to end suffering. The name doesn't appear in the canonical Gospels. It emerges in apocryphal texts and in the broader tradition that developed after the early Christian period. According to one legend, Longinus suffered from an eye disease and was cured when the blood of Christ touched his face. He converted, and according to some versions, died as a martyr. The lance itself became, over the following centuries, one of the most coveted and mystified objects in all of human history. The legend of the Spear of Destiny, which developed primarily during the Middle Ages and intensified dramatically in the 19th and 20th centuries, attributes to it a breathtaking power. Whoever possesses it holds mastery over the destiny of the world. Whatever the historical truth of this belief, its real-world consequences have been documented and are deeply unsettling. Adolf Hitler is reported to have been obsessed with this lance, and the annexation of Vienna's Hofburg treasury in 1938 was motivated at least in part by a desire to possess the lance held there. The historical facts of those events are verified. Hitler's mystical interpretation of them belongs to his own delusional worldview, but the lance was genuinely there, genuinely seized, and genuinely held by the Nazis until American forces recovered it in April 1945, hours before Hitler's death. The problem, or perhaps the richness, of the Lance of Longinus is that several credible candidates exist simultaneously. The lance at the Hofburg in Vienna, arguably the oldest, is a genuine medieval spear with a nail point embedded in the blade, claimed to be a nail from the crucifixion. There's a lance in Rome at the Vatican, another discovered at Antioch during the Crusades in circumstances described by eyewitnesses as miraculous, and another in Armenia. All claim authenticity. None can prove it definitively. What strikes me most about the Lance of Longinus is how an ordinary object, a Roman soldier's working tool, one of thousands in use at the time, became the center of a fascination that has never dimmed over 2,000 years. It appears in dozens of works of fiction. In the anime Neon Genesis Evangelion, where it plays a central cosmological role, in manga, in historical novels, in video games. It embodies something none of the other weapons on this list quite captures in the same way: the exact line between history and legend, between the verifiable and the sacred, between what we can confirm and what we choose to believe. And maybe that's the most powerful thing any weapon can be. Not an instrument of destruction, but a question we haven't finished asking. 12 weapons, 12 stories, 12 ways in which humans across every culture and every era have attempted to answer the same fundamental question: what makes something truly powerful? And the answer these myths consistently give is always the same. Underneath all the drama and spectacle, it's not the metal, it's not the size, it's not the sharpness, it's the story you tell about it, it's the meaning you invest in it, it's the way it comes to embody something that words alone cannot express. The Keraunos is cosmic order. Mjolnir is the protection of ordinary people. Excalibur is the legitimacy of power. The Lance of Longinus is the boundary between the temporal and the sacred. These weapons have survived for millennia because they speak about us, about what we value, what we fear, what we hope for. They are mirrors forged in metal and narrative. If you enjoyed this video, drop a comment below with your favorite weapon from this list, or tell me which legendary weapon you think deserved a spot that I left out. And if you want to keep exploring the mythologies and legends that shaped our world, the next video is going to take you somewhere even more extraordinary. See you there.